Your sister-in-law who was a college swimmer.
Sister-in-law who was a college swimmer. Okay.
Trans women should not compete in girls' sports. Male puberty means bigger bones and more muscles, and that does not disappear. Girls train their whole lives, then biological males take their scholarships. How is that fair to women?
I'm going to ask you whether or not it's possible that you are wrestling with a very small definition of fairness that doesn't really think of the whole picture. And maybe the thing that you're talking about is, in fact, not fair, but you were right and wrong at the same time. So I'm going to start with a sidebar, and I'll get there, I promise. So here's a sidebar, and I think you have to understand this in order to understand why the conclusion that trans women shouldn't compete in sports is not just a wrong one, but a dangerous one. You're risking so much by attacking trans people here, and I don't think you realize it. So I'm going to sidebar my way there. In the 1950s and 60s, it was incredibly difficult to end a marriage. The way that divorce laws were written at the time, you had to have your partner's permission in most states, so you couldn't leave your husband unless he told the court that you were allowed to leave him, or you had to prove fault. In most cases, that meant cheating, where you had to have proof that the husband was cheating in order to get out of the marriage, which they weren't willing to give or easy to provide. That changed in the 1970s with the introduction of both unilateral divorce, where you didn't need your partner's permission, and no-fault divorce, where you didn't need to prove that something had gone wrong for the marriage to end. You could just walk away from a marriage. And women, freely, for the first time in history, could leave their husbands. So here's what economists found when they studied what happened to women when they were legally allowed and freely allowed to leave their husbands for the first time. An 8 to 16% decline in female suicide, a 30% decline in domestic violence for both men and women, and a 10% decline in females murdered by their partners. When women lack power, when they lack control, they lose physical safety. Now, it's not 1970 anymore, and some things change, but some things don't change. And in so many circumstances across our society and economy, when women gain power, when they gain control, they gain physical safety. When they lose power or they lose control, they lose physical safety. And we've seen this in everything from sexual harassment cases from Title VII of the Civil Rights Act to abortion laws and trap laws in states in the run-up to Roe being overturned. Women's power is a direct proxy for how physically safe they will be able to be. So, in order to prevent trans women from competing in sports, we need to come up with some kind of sex check that allows women to prove that they are actually women. Do you think this will fall on the side of giving women more or less power? It's going to be less. At the youth level, at the college level, at the professional level, women basically need to have some kind of proof of vagina in order to compete. And we are going to create gatekeepers that have the ability to say yes or no, because her word doesn't count anymore. It doesn't matter if someone comes up and says, I'm a real woman, I'm an actual woman, I'm the woman that I say that I am. All it takes is one accusation of actually that's a trans woman for her to be called into question. And now a gatekeeper has to come in and adjudicate and say, no, that's a real woman. How is that gatekeeper going to do that? And what kind of power will they have over women athletes and false accusations? I mean, I need you to go through in your head right now and just sit with it for 10 sobering seconds. Every article or news story you have ever read about the sexual abuse women athletes already face before any type of trans ban that came with its own counterpart of some kind of vagina check that someone needs to have. You're thinking of the predatory doctor and U.S. gymnastics? You're thinking of the National Women's Soccer League and the pay-for-play grooming coaches that got kicked out in a wave of scandal. So go back to those, how powerful those athletes were, and how they were gate-kept even without some type of sex check to be held over them. And then go back to what I said about the women who had the power to leave their husbands. And I'm going to ask you again, does a trans ban give more power to women athletes or less? Or does it give power to people over them to check their bodies? You are giving power over female athletes to men who check their vagina. And if you think anything other than that will happen, you just don't want to know the truth. You don't want to think about it in practice. You just want to say it's not fair that they grew up male and walk away because your version of fairness is 1 square foot of real estate. It's one competition. It's one person. And not the tens of millions of girls who are thrown under the power of someone who can just simply say, I don't think you're a real girl. Prove it. Absolutely not. You want to hate trans people? Go on ahead and hate trans people, but do not take it out on female athletes. And while we're discussing it, wearing my shirt, for everybody who has a strong opinion on female athletes and what trans women should be allowed to do, let's do a quick show of hands. Who here has been to a professional women's sporting event? Who's been to multiple, more than one league? Who has watched a women's sporting event on TV? It is remarkable to me how much women athletes are thrown around as if the biggest problem they face isn't the fact that they play in stadiums that they don't own, that they're paid shit for being a professional athlete, that they have terrible TV media deals, that they can't get themselves shown on TV to get the type of advertising that would get them pay. They can't do any of that. And all of that is unfair. But the only amount of unfairness you care about is that less than 0.25% of trans people who compete in sports. You don't want to see fairness in female athletes, because if you did, you would be irate at how little they're paid. You would be irate at how hard it is to watch them on TV, or how shitty their stadiums are compared to men, or how much money public governments have sank into professional stadiums for a men's team that packed up and left 10 years later, and they won't give a dime to the women's team in their locality. That is what is unfair. Do not delude yourself to say that this is about fairness for women.